The car hummed softly as it wound through San Francisco's hilly streets, the city's fog curling like a lover's whisper around the tires. Arthur Bennett, 78, sat in the passenger seat, his gnarled hands clutching a small duffel bag, his heart a drumbeat of dread. This is it, he thought, the day they ship me off to some sterile nursing home to fade away. He stole a glance at his son, Julian, behind the wheel. At 42, Julian was a portrait of quiet intensity. Dark curls framing a face that held both resolve and something unreadable. Arthur's chest tightened. He'd raised Julian alone after his wife, Marianne, passed when Julian was just a boy. They'd been a team, surviving grief, poverty, and the weight of a world that didn't always understand them. But now, Arthur felt like a burden, his body betraying him with aches and tremors, his mind sharp but haunted by the fear of being forgotten. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice gravelly, "you don't have to sugarcoat it, just tell me where we're going." His eyes flicked to the road, half expecting to see the cold facade of a care facility looming ahead. Julian's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze forward. "Dad, just trust me, okay? It's not what you think." His tone was soft but edged with something Arthur couldn't place. Nervousness, maybe, or anticipation. Arthur grunted, unconvinced. For weeks, Julian had been vague about arrangements, dodging questions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Arthur had seen the brochures on Julian's kitchen counter, glossy pamphlets with names like Silver Horizons and Golden Years Care. He wasn't naive. His knees creaked, his hands shook, and his memory, though mostly intact, occasionally flickered like an old film reel. He'd overheard Julian on the phone, whispering about making it quick and not dragging it out. The signs were clear, or so Arthur thought. The car turned onto a quieter street, lined with Victorian homes painted in shades of lavender and teal. Arthur frowned. This wasn't the route to any nursing home he'd imagined. The houses here were alive, their windows glowing with warmth, their gardens bursting with roses and jasmine. A spark of confusion flared in his chest, but he smothered it. "Don't get your hopes up, old man." Julian pulled into a driveway, the car's engine falling silent. Arthur peered out the window at a charming two-story house, its porch adorned with hanging ferns and a swing that swayed gently in the evening breeze. A sign in the yard read, "Welcome home." Arthur's breath caught, but his mind raced with suspicion. What game is Julian playing? "Dad," Julian said, turning to face him, his brown eyes shimmering with emotion. "This isn't a nursing home. This is your new home. Our new home." Arthur's mouth opened, but no words came. His heart thudded, torn between disbelief and a fragile, unfamiliar hope. "What are you talking about?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian smiled, a real one this time, full of warmth and something deeper. "Love, yes, but also a quiet defiance. I've been planning this for months. I'm not letting you spend your days in some facility, Dad. You belong here with family, with me, and there's someone I want you to meet." Arthur's brow furrowed. Someone? Before he could press further, the front door of the house swung open, and a man stepped onto the porch. He was tall, with silver-streaked hair and a kind, weathered face that mirrored Arthur's own age. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and his smile was tentative but genuine, as if he, too, was stepping into uncharted territory. "Dad," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is Marcus, my partner." The world seemed to tilt. Arthur's hands tightened on the duffel bag, his mind reeling. Julian had never spoken of a partner, never hinted at this part of his life. For years, Arthur had wondered why Julian avoided relationships, why he poured his energy into his art gallery instead of building a family. Now, the truth stood before him, embodied in Marcus's gentle nod and the way Julian's hand reached for his, their fingers intertwining with a quiet strength. Arthur's throat burned. He'd grown up in a time when love like this was whispered in shadows, condemned by those too afraid to understand. He'd seen friends vanish into silence, their lives erased by shame or fear. And yet, here was his son, unafraid, offering him not just a home but a truth Arthur hadn't dared to imagine. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice cracking, "why didn't you tell me?" Julian's eyes glistened. "I wanted to, Dad. I was scared you wouldn't, I don't know, that you'd think less of me. But I'm done hiding. Marcus and we've built something real, and we want you to be part of it." Marcus stepped forward, his voice warm but steady. "Arthur, I know this is a lot, but Julian's told me so much about you, your strength, your stories. This house, it's for all of us. A place to start over, together." Arthur's gaze darted between them, his heart a battlefield of fear, pride, and something softer, acceptance. He thought of his own life, the love he'd lost with Marianne, the years he'd spent shielding Julian from a world that could be cruel. And now, Julian was offering him a new chapter, one where love wasn't just a memory but a living, breathing force. He set the duffel bag down, his hands trembling not from age but from the weight of this moment. "All right," he said, his voice steadying. "Let's see this home of ours." As they stepped toward the house, the fog parted, revealing a sky streaked with pink and gold. Arthur felt the weight of his fears begin to lift, replaced by a cautious hope. This wasn't the end he'd dreaded. It was a beginning, one he never could have imagined. The house smelled of cedar and fresh paint, a scent that wrapped Arthur like a warm blanket as he crossed the threshold. The living room was a burst of color, walls painted a soft sage green, adorned with Julian's vibrant abstract paintings, their bold strokes a testament to his son's untamed spirit. A leather couch sat by a bay window, where the last rays of sunlight spilled across a coffee table cluttered with art magazines and a vase of wildflowers. Arthur's eyes lingered on the details. A bookshelf stuffed with novels and photo albums, a fireplace with a mantel displaying a framed picture of him and Julian at a Giants game, years ago, both grinning like fools. His chest ached with the realization that this wasn't just a house. It was a home, crafted with intention, with love. "Take a seat, Dad," Julian said, gesturing to the couch. Marcus excused himself to the kitchen, murmuring something about coffee, leaving father and son alone. Arthur sank into the cushions, the softness a stark contrast to the stiff chairs he'd imagined in a nursing home. He looked at Julian, who perched on the armrest, his hands fidgeting. "Julian," Arthur began, his voice low, "how long have you and Marcus?" 3 years, Julian admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "We met at an art exhibition. He's a photographer, does these incredible black and white portraits. I didn't plan on it, Dad. It just happened, and it felt right." Arthur nodded slowly, processing. 3 years. His son had carried this secret for 3 years, and Arthur hadn't seen it. Guilt gnawed at him. Had he been so wrapped up in his own aging, his own fears, that he'd missed the truth of Julian's life? "I wish you'd told me sooner," Arthur said, his tone gentle but tinged with hurt. "Did you think I wouldn't understand?" Julian's eyes dropped to the floor. "It wasn't about you, Dad. It was me. Growing up, I saw how people treated folks who were different. I heard the slurs, saw the fights. I didn't want to put you through that, not after everything you went through raising me. Arthur's mind flashed to the 1970s, to neighbors who'd whispered about those people in the Castro, to the fear that clung to the air like damp fog. He'd never joined in the hate, but he hadn't spoken out either. Silence, he realized now, could be its own kind of betrayal. "I'm no saint, Julian," Arthur said, his voice thick. "I've made mistakes, but you're my son. Nothing could make me love you less." Julian's eyes met his, glistening with unshed tears. "I know, Dad. That's why we're here. I want you to be part of this, part of us. Marcus and I, we bought this house for all three of us. There's a room upstairs for you with a view of the garden. It's yours if you want it." Arthur's throat tightened. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. About Marcus, about their life, about how they'd planned this without him knowing. But the weight of Julian's words anchored him. This wasn't just a house. It was a promise. Marcus returned with a tray of coffee mugs, his presence steadying the room. "Arthur, I hope you like strong coffee," he said, setting the tray down. "Julian says you're a bit of a caffeine fiend." Arthur managed a small laugh, the tension easing. Guilty as charged. He took a mug, the warmth seeping into his hands. "So, Marcus, tell me about yourself. Julian's been stingy with the details." Marcus chuckled, settling into an armchair. "Born and raised in Chicago. Moved here a decade ago for the light. It's perfect for photography. I've got a studio downtown, mostly portraits, some landscapes. Julian's been my biggest supporter, even when my work's too moody for most galleries." "Moody's good," Arthur said, sipping his coffee. "Life's not all sunshine. You need shadows to see the whole picture." Marcus's eyes lit up, as if Arthur had unlocked something. "Exactly. That's what I love about Julian's art, too. It's raw, honest. Like him." Julian flushed, and Arthur felt a pang of pride. His son was loved, not just by him, but by someone who saw the world through the same lens of beauty and truth. For the first time in years, Arthur felt the stirrings of a future he hadn't dared to imagine. As the evening unfolded, they talked about Marcus's childhood, Arthur's days as a mechanic, Julian's dreams for his gallery. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the clink of mugs. But beneath it all, Arthur sensed a current of unspoken questions. What did this new life mean? Could he fit into it, an old man in a world that felt so young, so bold? As night fell, Julian showed him to his room upstairs. It was simple but thoughtful. A sturdy bed, a desk by the window, a quilt that reminded Arthur of Marianne's handiwork. He stood at the window, gazing at the garden below, where fairy lights twinkled like stars. "Dad," Julian said from the doorway, "you okay with this?" "All of it." Arthur turned, his eyes soft. "I'm more than okay, son. I'm proud." Julian's smile was a beacon in the dim light. As he left, Arthur sat on the bed, his heart full. The house creaked softly, settling around him like an embrace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was fading. He felt alive. Morning light filtered through the garden, casting dappled shadows across Arthur's room. He woke slowly, the unfamiliar softness of the bed disorienting until yesterday's events flooded back. Julian's revelation, Marcus's warm smile, the house that wasn't a nursing home but a home. He sat up, his joints protesting, and caught his reflection in the mirror across the room. The man staring back looked older than he felt, but there was a spark in his eyes, a flicker of something he hadn't seen in years. Purpose. Downstairs, the kitchen was alive with the clatter of pans and the rich aroma of bacon. Marcus stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a practiced hand, while Julian set the table, humming a tune Arthur didn't recognize. The domesticity of it all felt surreal, like stepping into a painting where every brushstroke was deliberate, vibrant. "Morning, Dad," Julian called, his voice bright. "Hope you're hungry. Marcus makes the best pancakes in the city." "High praise," Marcus said, winking at Arthur. "But I'll let you be the judge." Arthur settled at the table, his hands wrapping around a mug of coffee. Marcus slid his way. The normalcy of the moment was almost overwhelming. For years, his mornings had been solitary. Cold cereal in his cramped apartment, the TV droning to fill the silence. Now here he was, surrounded by warmth, by family. They ate in comfortable silence at first, the pancakes fluffy and sweet, the bacon crisp. Then Marcus broke the quiet. "Arthur, Julian tells me you were a mechanic. Ever work on anything fancy, like a vintage Mustang?" Arthur's face lit up, a rare grin breaking through. "Oh sure. Back in the 80s, I had a '67 Mustang in my shop. Cherry red, V8 engine. Purred like a dream. Took me 3 months to rebuild her. But when she roared to life, it was like music." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "That's incredible. I've always wanted to try my hand at something like that. Photography's my thing, but I love the idea of bringing something old back to life." Arthur nodded, a connection sparking. "It's about patience. You don't rush a machine or a person. You listen, figure out what they need." Julian watched them, his expression soft. "Dad used to let me tinker in the shop when I was a kid. Taught me how to hold a wrench before I could ride a bike. Explains why you're so good with your hands," Marcus said, nudging Julian playfully. Arthur caught the look they shared, intimate, unguarded, and felt a pang, not of discomfort, but of awe. His son had found love, real love, and Arthur hadn't been there to see it bloom. As breakfast wound down, Julian cleared his throat. "Dad, there's something else I need to tell you. About why we moved here, why now." His voice was steady, but his fingers drummed nervously on the table. Arthur's stomach tightened. "Go on." Julian exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "There's a community center a few blocks away. They're starting a program for seniors, art classes, music, even some mechanic workshops. Marcus and I were volunteering there, and we want you to be part of it. Not just as a participant, but maybe teaching a class, sharing what you know." Arthur blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Teach? Julian, I'm no professor. I'm just an old grease monkey." "You're more than that," Marcus said firmly. "Julian's told me about the cars you fixed, the stories you told him about each one. That's knowledge, Arthur. Wisdom. People need that." Arthur's mind raced. Teaching? He'd spent his life under hoods, not in front of crowds. But the idea stirred something in him, a chance to be useful, to matter. Still, doubt crept in. What if they don't want an old man like me? Times have changed. Folks don't care about carburetors anymore. Julian leaned forward, his eyes fierce. "They'll care about you. You've got stories, Dad. You've lived through things most people can't imagine. And this community center, it's inclusive, welcoming. It's for everyone, no matter who they are or who they love." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Arthur understood what Julian wasn't saying. This was a place where Marcus and Julian could be themselves, where Arthur could be part of a world that embraced them. He thought of his own past, the friends he'd lost to prejudice, the silence he'd kept to protect Julian. Maybe this was his chance to make amends, to build something new. "I'll think about it," Arthur said finally, his voice gruff but warm. "No promises, though." Julian grinned. That's all I ask. The rest of the day unfolded slowly. Marcus showed Arthur the garden, where herbs and vegetables grew in neat rows, and Julian gave him a tour of the neighborhood, pointing out the community center. A bright, modern building with murals splashed across its walls. Arthur felt a flicker of excitement, but also fear. Could he step into this new role? Could he keep up with a world that felt so different from the one he'd known? That evening, as they sat on the porch, Arthur watched Julian and Marcus laugh over a shared joke, their hands brushing casually. He thought of Marianne. How she'd have loved this. Her son happy, her husband finding purpose again. For the first time in years, Arthur felt her presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet blessing. The community center buzzed with life, a kaleidoscope of voices and colors that made Arthur's head spin. He stood at the entrance, clutching a thermos of coffee, feeling like a fish out of water. Teenagers with dyed hair darted past. An elderly woman in a bright headscarf chatted animatedly with a young man in a wheelchair, and a group of kids painted a mural of a rainbow flag. Julian had insisted he come to check it out, but Arthur felt exposed, his old flannel shirt and work boots out of place among the vibrant crowd. Julian appeared at his side, his gallery owner confidence in full swing. "Ready, Dad? They're excited to meet you." Arthur snorted. "Excited to meet a cranky old man? You sure about that?" "Positive," Julian said, steering him toward a room labeled Workshop Studio. Inside, a small group waited, men and women of varying ages, their faces curious but kind. A table held tools and engine parts, a nod to the mechanic workshop Julian had mentioned. Arthur's fingers itched to touch the familiar metal, but his stomach churned with nerves. A woman with silver hair and a warm smile approached. "You must be Arthur. I'm Lila, the program director. Julian's been singing your praises." Arthur shook her hand, his grip firm despite his unease. "Hope he didn't oversell me. I'm just a guy who knows engines." Lila laughed. "That's exactly what we need. Some of our folks are car enthusiasts, others just want to learn something new. You're a legend already." The workshop began awkwardly, Arthur stumbling through introductions, his voice gruff. But as he started explaining the basics of a carburetor, something shifted. The group leaned in, their questions sharp and eager. A young man named Diego, with tattoos snaking up his arms, asked about troubleshooting a misfiring engine. A woman named Priya, barely out of her teens, shared her dream of restoring her dad's old Chevy. Arthur found himself talking easily, his hands moving over the parts like old friends, his stories weaving through the lesson. By the end, the room felt less like a classroom and more like his old shop, alive with the hum of connection. Diego lingered, his eyes bright. "Man, you make it sound like poetry. You ever think about writing this stuff down?" Arthur chuckled, surprised. "Poetry? Nah, just grease and grit." But Diego's words stuck with him as they left the center. Julian clapped him on the shoulder. "Told you they'd love you. You're a natural." Arthur shrugged, but a warmth spread through him. For the first time in years, he felt useful, not just a relic of a bygone era. Back at the house, Marcus was waiting with dinner, lasagna, rich and cheesy, a recipe from his mother. They ate on the porch, the city's lights twinkling below, and Arthur found himself opening up about the workshop, about the spark he'd felt. "You should have seen Diego," Arthur said, a grin tugging at his lips. "Kid's got a knack for engines. Reminds me of you, Julian, always poking around my toolbox." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you found your people." "Maybe," Arthur admitted, "but it's a lot. This world, it's different. Everyone's so open, so loud about who they are. Back in my day, you kept things quiet. Julian's face softened. I know, Dad. That's why this matters. Marcus and we don't have to hide here. And you don't have to either. You can just be you. Arthur looked at his son, then at Marcus, their hands resting close on the table. He thought of the community center, of Lila's warmth, Diego's enthusiasm. Maybe this was what Julian meant. A place where love wasn't a secret, where an old man could still have something to give. But later that night, as Arthur lay in bed, doubts crept in. He'd seen the rainbow flags, the couples holding hands, the unapologetic joy of the center. It was beautiful, but it stirred memories of a different time. Friends shunned, families torn apart. He'd protected Julian from that world, but had he shielded him too much? Had his silence made Julian feel he had to hide? The next morning, Arthur found Julian in the garden, tending to a row of tomatoes. Julian, he said, his voice low, did I ever make you feel like you couldn't tell me who you are? Julian paused, his hands still in the dirt. No, Dad. You were always there for me. I saw how the world treated people like me. I didn't want to add to your burdens. Arthur's heart sank. You're not a burden. Never were. I just wish I'd known sooner, so you didn't have to carry it alone. Julian stood, brushing soil from his hands. You're here now. That's what counts. They stood in silence, the morning sun warm on their faces. Arthur felt the weight of years, but also the lightness of truth. He was beginning to understand. This house, this city, this family, it was a chance to rewrite the past, to build something stronger. Weeks passed, and Arthur settled into a rhythm. Mornings were spent at the community center, where his mechanic workshops grew in popularity. Diego became a regular, his quick wit and knack for engines earning Arthur's respect. Priya brought her Chevy's manual one day, and they spent hours poring over it, Arthur guiding her through the intricacies of a fuel pump rebuild. The work grounded him, each lesson a reminder that he still had something to offer. At home, Arthur found himself drawn to Marcus's photography studio, a converted garage filled with soft light and framed portraits. One afternoon, Marcus caught him studying a black and white photo of a young couple, their faces radiant with love. That's from a pride parade, Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe. Captured it last year. You can feel their joy, can't you? Arthur nodded, his throat tight. It's powerful. You've got a gift, Marcus. Marcus smiled. Thanks. Julian says you've got a way of seeing things, too. Ever think about picking up a camera? Arthur laughed, waving a hand. Me? I probably break it. Stick to wrenches, that's my language. But Marcus's words lingered, and later that week, Arthur found himself in the studio again, watching Marcus adjust lights for a shoot. Show me, Arthur said abruptly, how you do it. Marcus's eyes lit up. He handed Arthur a camera, guiding his hands. It's about seeing the story in the moment. Look through the lens, find the light. Arthur peered through the viewfinder, the world narrowing to a single frame. He snapped a photo of Marcus, his face softened by concentration, and when Marcus developed it, Arthur was stunned. The image held a quiet strength, a depth he hadn't expected. You're a natural, Marcus said, clapping him on the back. We'll make a photographer out of you yet. Arthur grunted, but a smile tugged at his lips. He was starting to see it, the beauty in capturing moments in freezing time. It was like fixing an engine. Finding the pieces, making them fit, bringing something to life. But not everything was easy. One evening, Arthur overheard a tense conversation between Julian and Marcus. It's happening again, Julian said, his voice low. Another gallery pulled my work. said it's too political. Marcus's tone was steady but frustrated. It's because of the Pride exhibit, isn't it? They're fine with your abstracts, but the moment you show who we are, they back off. Arthur's stomach churned. He'd seen Julian's latest paintings, vibrant canvases celebrating love in all its forms, inspired by Marcus's photos. They were beautiful but bold, unapologetic. Arthur knew the world hadn't changed as much as he'd hoped. He confronted Julian the next morning. "Heard you last night. What's going on with the gallery?" Julian sighed, running a hand through his curls. "It's nothing new, Dad. Some folks love my work until it challenges them. Then it's too much." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Your art's honest. That's what matters. Don't let them dim you." Julian's eyes softened. "Thanks, Dad. It's just exhausting, you know? Fighting for a place in the world." Arthur understood. He'd fought his own battles. Grief, loss, the slow grind of age. But seeing Julian struggle, he felt a fire he hadn't known in years. "You're not fighting alone," he said. "Not anymore." That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He wandered into the living room, where Julian's paintings leaned against the wall, waiting for a gallery that might never come. He thought of his own silence, the years he'd stayed quiet to avoid trouble. No more. Julian deserved better. They all did. The next day, Arthur marched into the community center and found Lila. "I want to do more," he said. "Not just workshops. I want to help with the art program, maybe even a show. For Julian, for everyone." Lila's face lit up. "Arthur, that's perfect. We've been wanting to host a community exhibit. Your voice, your story. It could bring it all together." Arthur felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't just about engines or photos. It was about building something. A legacy, a family, a community. He didn't know how, but he'd find a way to make it happen. For Julian, for Marcus, for himself. The idea of an art exhibit took root, growing faster than Arthur expected. Lila rallied the community center's volunteers, and soon, Arthur found himself at the heart of it, planning alongside Diego, Priya, and a dozen others. They envisioned a show that celebrated identity, love, struggle, triumph, in all its forms. Julian's paintings would be the centerpiece, paired with Marcus's photographs and contributions from local artists. Arthur threw himself into the work, his days filled with purpose. He met with artists, helped design flyers, even tried his hand at curating, his mechanic's eye for detail proving surprisingly useful. Diego teased him, calling him the boss. But Arthur saw the pride in the young man's eyes. Priya, meanwhile, brought her Chevy to the center one weekend, and Arthur guided a group through a hands-on restoration session, the group's laughter echoing through the lot. But not everyone was supportive. A local business owner, Mr. Callahan, who donated to the center in the past, caught wind of the exhibit's theme. He cornered Arthur one afternoon outside the center, his face red with indignation. "This pride nonsense," Callahan spat. "It's not what this community needs. You're turning a good place into a circus." Arthur's hands clenched, his old temper flaring. "This community's about people, Callahan. People like my son, his partner, these kids. If you can't handle that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong." Callahan stormed off, but his words lingered, a reminder of the world Arthur had known. A world that still lingered in pockets of intolerance. He told Julian about the encounter that evening, expecting anger, but Julian just sighed. "That's how it is, Dad. Some people never change." "Then we changed the world for them," Arthur said, his voice fierce. "Your art, Marcus's photos, this exhibit. It's bigger than one loudmouth. It's about showing people what love looks like. Julian stared at him, then pulled him into a hug. "When did you get so wise?" "Always was," Arthur said, chuckling. "You just didn't notice." As the exhibit's opening neared, tension mounted. Another gallery dropped Julian's work, citing scheduling conflicts. But Arthur saw through the excuse. He watched Julian's shoulders slump, Marcus's quiet frustration as they discussed finances. The house, the exhibit, their life. It was all a risk, a leap of faith. Arthur felt the weight of it, but also the fire. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of this fight. One evening, Arthur found Marcus in the studio, sorting through photos for the exhibit. "Need a hand?" Arthur asked, picking up a print. A portrait of a young woman with a rainbow flag draped over her shoulders, her eyes fierce with pride. Marcus nodded, grateful. "These are the heart of the show. Every face tells a story, like yours." Arthur paused, the photo trembling in his hands. "Mine? I'm no story. Just an old man trying to keep up." Marcus shook his head. "You're wrong. You're here, learning, fighting for Julian. For us. That's a story worth telling." Arthur didn't reply, but the words sank deep. That night, he sat at his desk, a notebook open, and began to write. Not a memoir, not poetry, but fragments. Memories of his shop, of Marianne's laugh, of Julian's first painting, of this new life. It was messy, unpolished, but it felt right, like turning a wrench to loosen a stubborn bolt. The exhibit's opening loomed, and Arthur felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He wasn't just supporting Julian anymore. He was building something. A bridge between his past and their future, between silence and celebration. He didn't know if it would change the world, but it was changing him. The night of the exhibit arrived. The community center transformed into a gallery of light and color. Julian's paintings glowed on the walls, their bold strokes paired with Marcus's photographs, each frame a window into a life. Arthur moved through the crowd, his heart pounding with pride and nerves. The room buzzed with energy. Artists, neighbors, strangers, all drawn to the stories on display. Arthur's own contribution was small but personal. A corner of the exhibit featured his notebook, open to a page about his shop days, paired with a photo Marcus had taken of him working on Priya's Chevy. The caption read, "Arthur's Legacy. Building more than engines." He'd blushed when Lila suggested it, but now, seeing people linger over his words, he felt a quiet thrill. Julian found him by the notebook, his eyes shining. "Dad, I didn't know you wrote this." Arthur shrugged, embarrassed. "Just scribbles. Your stuff's the real art." Julian shook his head. "This is art too. It's you. It's us." The night wasn't without tension. Callahan showed up, his presence a dark cloud, muttering to a few others who shared his views. Arthur braced for trouble, but Lila handled it smoothly, steering Callahan away with a polite but firm word. The community had spoken. This was a place for love, not hate. As the evening wore on, Arthur watched Julian and Marcus move through the crowd, their hands linked, their smiles radiant. He saw Diego showing off his sketches to Priya, who beamed with pride. He saw Lila laughing with a group of teens, their faces painted with glitter. This was what Julian had meant, a world where everyone belonged. But the night's biggest surprise came when Julian took the microphone, his voice steady but emotional. "This exhibit is about love," he said, "but it's also about family. My dad, Arthur, thought he was being sent to a nursing home. Instead, we brought him here to a home we built together. This show is for him, for Marcus, for all of us who choose love over fear." The crowd erupted in applause, and Arthur's eyes burned with tears. He felt Marianne's presence again, her warmth in the room's energy. He'd spent years afraid of fading, but here he was, seen, loved, part of something bigger. Later, as the crowd thinned, Arthur stood with Julian and Marcus outside, the city's lights twinkling below. "You did good, son," Arthur said, his voice thick. "Both of you." Marcus squeezed his shoulder. "Couldn't have done it without you, Arthur." Arthur looked at them, his heart full. "Let's go home," he said, and for the first time in years, the word felt complete. Months later, the house on the hill was more than a home. It was a haven. Arthur's workshops at the community center had grown, drawing crowds from across the city. He'd even started a photography class with Marcus, their unlikely partnership a hit among the students. Julian's art found new galleries, ones that embraced his vision, and the exhibit's success had sparked a movement, with more events planned to celebrate the community's diversity. Arthur sat on the porch one evening, a notebook in his lap, scribbling memories. Julian and Marcus were inside, laughing over a board game, their voices a comforting hum. Arthur thought of the journey that had brought him here, the fear of a nursing home, the shock of Julian's truth, the slow unfolding of a new life. He'd spent years thinking his story was over, that age had robbed him of purpose. But now he saw it differently. His story wasn't just his. It was Julian's, Marcus's, Diego's, Priya's, the community's. It was a story of love, of second chances, of building something that lasted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Arthur closed his notebook. He didn't need to write the ending. He was living it, surrounded by family, by love, by a future he'd never dared to dream. And that, he knew, was more than enough.